I was sitting at my desk that Tuesday morning when my husband Derek walked in carrying an insulated lunch bag. He had this grin on his face, ear to ear, like he'd just pulled off the surprise of the century. It was our second anniversary. Well, 2.5 years of marriage, to be exact, September 28th. I should have been over the moon, you know? A woman my age, 51 years old, getting surprise breakfasts delivered to her office by her handsome husband. That's supposed to be romantic, right? That's the dream. But the second he opened that bag, my stomach twisted into a knot. The smell hit me like a wall. Fried catfish and grits. Heavy, greasy, overwhelming. My ulcer, which had been giving me hell for months, immediately started acting up. I felt nauseous right there in my chair. Derek was beaming at me. He said he'd gotten up at 5 in the morning to make this special meal just for me, that he'd fried the catfish exactly the way I liked it. But here's the thing that sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I never, not once in our marriage, told Derek I liked fried catfish. In fact, I'd mentioned multiple times that fried food made my ulcer flare up something terrible. So why on earth would he bring me this? I tried to smile. I thanked him, told him it looked wonderful, but explained that I wasn't feeling well that morning, that my stomach was bothering me. And that's when everything shifted. His smile stayed plastered on his face, but something behind his eyes went ice cold. He started insisting, kept saying I needed to eat, that I was working myself to death, that I looked weak and this would give me energy. He pulled out a metal fork and actually tried to feed me a bite right there, leaning over my desk like I was some kind of invalid. I pulled back and told him I really couldn't, not right then. And I saw it. Just for a split second, his jaw tightened. His whole body went rigid. Then he forced that smile back on and said something that made my blood run cold. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Diane, baby, I spent 2 hours making this for you. You're going to eat it. You have to." It wasn't a request. It was a command. And every instinct I had, every alarm bell that a woman develops after 51 years on this earth, started screaming at me that something was very, very wrong. But I didn't want to cause a scene there in my office. So I took the containers, promised I'd eat them as soon as I finished an urgent phone call, and set them on the corner of my desk. He kissed my forehead, squeezed my shoulder just a bit too hard, and walked out looking satisfied with himself. I sat there staring at those containers. The smell was making me sick. My door was cracked open, and I could see Vanessa, Derek's new executive assistant, sitting at her desk just outside. She was 28 years old, pretty girl, always dressed to the nines in clothes that seemed way too expensive for what we paid her. And in that moment, looking at her, I saw a way out. A way to get rid of this food without confronting Derek, without making waves. I called her into my office. She came in with that helpful smile she always wore. I put on my best professional voice and explained that my husband had brought me this lovely breakfast, but my stomach was acting up and I hated to see it go to waste. I told her I knew she was from South Carolina and I thought maybe she'd appreciate some good Southern cooking. Her whole face lit up. She thanked me over and over, took those containers like I'd given her a gift, and went back to her desk. I watched her through the glass. She sat down, opened the containers, and started eating with an appetite I almost envied. I tried to focus on my work, but my eyes kept drifting back to her. She seemed fine, happy even. And I started to relax, started to think maybe I was just being paranoid. That Derek had made a nice gesture and I was creating problems that didn't exist. I actually laughed at myself. I was about to pick up the phone to call our biggest client when I heard the sound. Her fork hit the floor, that metallic clatter on the carpet, then a gasp, sharp and desperate. She put her hand on her stomach, and then came the scream. A sound I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. A scream that came from somewhere deep inside her soul, a sound of pure agony that made every person in that office freeze. The chaos erupted, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in my chair, watching through the glass as people rushed toward her. Someone was yelling to call 911. Someone else was screaming for help. And Vanessa was on the floor, convulsing, with bloody foam coming from her mouth. She was wearing this beautiful burgundy dress, something Derek had bought for her, I realized later, and it was getting stained as she thrashed on the carpet. Her eyes had rolled back in her head. All I could think about was that container, the catfish, the way Derek had insisted, the look in his eyes when I refused. And then I saw him. Derek came running from the other end of the office, but he didn't go to Vanessa first. He came straight to me. He grabbed my arm so hard I felt his fingers digging into my flesh, and he pulled me close. His face was inches from mine, and he hissed words that would change everything. "What did you do? Why her?" The world stopped. The screaming around us, the phones ringing, the chaos, it all faded into nothing. All I could hear was that question echoing in my head. Why her? Not what happened to her, not, oh my God, is she okay? But why her? And in that moment the fog lifted. The denial I'd been living in for months just evaporated. That food was poisoned, and it was meant for me. But for you to really understand how a man I loved, a man I trusted with everything, could get to that point, I need to back up a little. Let me tell you who I am and how I got here. My name is Diane Porter, and I'm 51 years old. I'm the president and CEO of Porter Distribution Systems right here in Charlotte, North Carolina. But this company wasn't always mine. It was built by my first husband, Robert, a good man. A man who started this business with nothing but a pickup truck and a dream back in the early 2000s. He worked himself to the bone, built something real, something honest. And then in 2019, cancer took him from me. Just like that. 52 years old and gone, leaving me with an 8-year-old daughter named Maya and a business I barely knew how to run. I threw myself into that company. I turned my grief into spreadsheets and contracts and growth strategies. I learned everything Robert had known, and then some. The company became my sanctuary and Maya's inheritance. By 2021, we were doing $22 million a year in revenue. I'd proven to myself and to everyone else that I could do this. That same year, I met Derek Hutchinson at a business networking event. He was a business strategist, 44 years old, sharp as a tack, and charming in a way that just swept me off my feet. He listened to me talk about the struggles of running the company, about the loneliness of being a widow, about raising Maya on my own. And for the first time in years, I felt seen, not as Robert's widow or as the boss of Porter Distribution, but just as Diane, a woman who deserved to be happy again. We got married in 2022. I genuinely believed God had given me a second chance at love. I brought Derek into the company as vice president of operations. I gave him access to everything, trusted him with the business Robert had built, with my daughter's future. I gave him power, and I gave him my heart. About 4 months before that anniversary, Derek hired Vanessa Price. He sold her to me as the most organized, most efficient assistant he'd ever worked with. And I had to admit, she was good at her job. But there was something else there, something I tried to ignore. The way they'd laugh together in the hallway, voices dropping to whispers. The way conversations would stop dead the moment I walked up. The way he'd touch her shoulder just a bit too long when they were looking at documents together. But what was I supposed to do? Accuse my husband of having an affair with his assistant? I'd sound like the bitter older wife, jealous and insecure. So I swallowed it. I told myself I was imagining things, that my past trauma was making me see threats where there weren't any. I focused on my work and tried to trust the man I'd married. That morning, September 28th, I got to the office early like I always did. The workload was crushing, and even though it was our anniversary, I had reports to review and decisions to make. I was deep in some financial projections when Derek walked in without knocking. He had that lunch bag and that smile, and he made this big production of wishing me happy anniversary and explaining how he'd made this special breakfast before dawn. I thanked him, told him it was sweet, but explained about my ulcer. His reaction is what terrified me. He wouldn't take no for an answer. That smile got fixed, frozen on his face. He started listing reasons why I had to eat. said the company was killing me, that I'd lost weight, that I needed my strength. He picked up that fork and literally tried to put food in my mouth while I was sitting in my CEO chair. I pulled away and said I really couldn't. Not right then. For just a fraction of a second, I saw pure rage flash across his face. His jaw clenched. His eyes went hard. Then he smiled again and said those words that made every hair on my body stand up. "Just one bite, Diane. I made this for you. You have to try it." It wasn't the words of a loving husband. It was an order, a demand. Some primitive survival instinct that every woman carries kicked in right then. I knew, somewhere deep in my soul, that I could not eat that food. But I also knew I couldn't confront him there, not in the office, not without knowing what I was dealing with. So I took the containers, promised to eat them after I finished a call, and set them on my desk. He seemed satisfied with that. He kissed my forehead, told me he loved me, and left. I stared at those containers for a long time. The smell was making me nauseous. My stomach was churning, and it wasn't just the ulcer. Through my open door, I could see Vanessa at her desk, and that's when the idea came to me. A way to get rid of the food without angering Derek, without starting a fight I wasn't ready for. I called her in. She walked in all bright and cheerful. I explained that Derek had made me breakfast, but my stomach wasn't cooperating, and did she want it? I mentioned that she was from South Carolina and might appreciate some traditional Southern cooking. It seemed like a shame to waste it. Her eyes went wide with gratitude. She thanked me probably 5 times, took the containers with both hands like they were precious, and went back to her desk, practically glowing. I tried to work. I really did. But I kept glancing through the glass at her. She was eating with real enjoyment, smiling to herself. And I started to feel ridiculous. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe Derek really had just tried to do something nice, and I was being an ungrateful, suspicious wife. I actually smiled and shook my head at myself, thinking how crazy I was being. I was reaching for the phone to make that client call when it happened. The fork fell first. Then her hand went to her stomach. Then that scream, that horrible scream that will haunt me forever. And then the chaos. People were running toward her. Someone was shouting into a phone with 911. I could hear fragments of panicked voices all around me. And I just sat there, frozen, watching Vanessa convulse on the floor. That beautiful dress Derek had bought her was getting ruined. Her eyes had rolled back. Bloody foam was coming from her mouth. And all I could think was, that was supposed to be me. That container was supposed to be in my stomach. I was supposed to be the one on that floor. That's when Derek appeared. He didn't go to Vanessa. He came straight for me, grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises, pulled me close, and hissed that question that confirmed everything. "What did you do? Why her?" He didn't ask what happened. He didn't scream for someone to help her. He asked what I did, and why her. In that instant, everything became crystal clear. The months of suspicion, the feeling that something was wrong, the way he'd insisted I eat that food. It all made sense in the most horrible way possible. My husband had tried to poison me. And he was furious, not because a young woman was dying, but because his plan had failed. The paramedics came in like a storm. They were fast and professional, speaking in medical codes I didn't understand. They got Vanessa onto a stretcher, and watching them carry her past all the desks, past all my employees who were staring in shock and horror, that image burned itself into my brain forever. I knew I'd never forget the sight of her being wheeled out of my office, fighting for her life because of food I'd given her. Derek's whole demeanor changed then. Suddenly, he was the concerned boss, the worried colleague. He put his hand on my back with this fake tenderness that made my skin crawl, and he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. He said something about what a nightmare this was, about how she had to be okay, about how young she was. I looked at him and saw the monster behind the mask for the first time. I couldn't even speak. I just stood there and nodded. We drove to the hospital in my car. The silence was suffocating, broken only by his fake sobs. He kept saying things like he couldn't understand what could have happened, that she was so young and healthy, that it made no sense. Every word was a knife twisting in my chest. He was testing me, trying to gauge what I knew, trying to see if his plan could still work somehow. I felt dirty, like I was an accomplice to something evil. The guilt of handing her that food started eating me alive. Why didn't I just throw it in the trash? Why didn't I? The hospital waiting room was cold and white and smelled like disinfectant. Derek paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair, the picture of anguish. But I could see it in his eyes. They weren't filled with hope when he looked down the hallway. They were filled with fear. The fear of a criminal waiting to be caught. I sat perfectly still, replaying every detail of the morning in my head. The insistence, the command. You have to try it. The rage when I refused. I had no proof yet, but deep in my soul, I already knew the truth. After what felt like hours, a doctor appeared. An older man, maybe in his 60s, with exhaustion written all over his face. He asked if we were responsible for Ms. Price. Derek jumped up immediately, introduced himself as her supervisor, asked how she was doing. The doctor led us to a more private corner of the waiting room. His voice was low and serious when he told us it wasn't a sudden illness. It wasn't an allergic reaction. They'd found a toxic substance in her bloodstream. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Poisoned. I looked at Derek. His eyes went wide, his mouth dropped open, a perfect performance of shock and horror. He cried out, asking how, where, demanding to know what happened. I just stood there silent, feeling my heart trying to pound its way out of my chest. The doctor's voice got even quieter. He said there was something else, a complication. They'd run tests and discovered that Ms. Price was pregnant, about 6 weeks along. The air got thin. I felt dizzy, pregnant. Vanessa was pregnant. Derek went completely rigid beside me. The doctor continued, explaining that the trauma to her body had been severe, that despite their best efforts, she had lost the baby. I closed my eyes. A life. A tiny little life had been lost in this sick, twisted game. And I knew, with absolute certainty, whose child it had been. I opened my eyes and stared at Derek. His face had gone ashen. This wasn't part of his performance anymore. This was real shock. He'd just found out that his plan to murder me had not only failed, but had killed his own unborn child. He stood there, mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. And that's when 2 police officers came around the corner, asking for Mr. Hutchinson and Mrs. Porter. That's when Derek's survival instinct kicked in. He looked at the police, looked at me, and the mask of the concerned husband fell away completely. What I saw underneath was pure panic. He took a step toward the officers and pointed a shaking finger right at me. His voice came out loud, accusatory, echoing down that quiet hospital hallway. And he screamed for everyone to hear. It was her! She did this! She poisoned my assistant because she was jealous! Derek's finger pointing at me felt like a weapon. Every word out of his mouth was an attack. She did it out of jealousy. She knew about us. The hospital corridor turned into his stage, and he was performing for an audience. The 2 officers, who'd had neutral expressions before, were now looking at me with suspicion. It's a story as old as time, isn't it? The older wife, the successful younger mistress, the triangle of jealousy. Derek was serving me up to them on a platter, with motive and opportunity all wrapped up in a bow. I was in such shock I could barely speak. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Within an hour, I was being taken to the police station. Me, Diane Porter. A woman who'd never even gotten a parking ticket in her entire life. I was being questioned about attempted murder. The interrogation was the most humiliating experience I've ever endured. The room was tiny and cold and reeked of stale coffee and sweat. The detective, a man named Harris, looked at me over a folder like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. He didn't call me Mrs. Porter. It was just Diane. He wanted me to know that in that room, my CEO title meant absolutely nothing. He made me tell the story of that morning 5 different times, and every single time, when I got to the part about offering the food to Vanessa, He'd shake his head slowly and write something in his notes. He asked if I knew about the affair. I said no. He asked if I didn't find it strange that my husband would bring breakfast to my office. He asked why I gave it to her specifically. Every question was a trap. I could feel the walls closing in. They let me go hours later, but only on the condition that I didn't leave Charlotte. My lawyer, Richard, who I'd known since Robert's time, showed up and told me I was officially a person of interest. A person of interest in the poisoning of my husband's pregnant mistress. The irony was suffocating. I went home to the house I shared with Derek, and it felt like a foreign place. Every picture frame with our smiling faces seemed to mock me. I walked into the kitchen and saw the skillet he must have used to fry that catfish. My stomach turned and I ran to the bathroom. After I'd thrown up everything in my stomach, I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were swollen and red, but behind the shock and the pain, something else started to burn. A cold, sharp anger. They wanted a villain? They wanted the jealous wife? No, I wasn't going to be the passive victim in this story. Derek had made one critical mistake. He hadn't killed me. And he'd underestimated me completely. I picked up my phone and called the only person in the world I trusted in that moment. Nicole, I need you at my house, right now. Nicole, my executive assistant, arrived in less than 15 minutes. She wasn't just my employee, she was my friend, practically family. She'd been there when Robert died, had held me together when I thought I'd fall apart. When she walked in and saw the state I was in, she didn't ask questions. She just hugged me. And I fell apart in her arms. I cried all the tears I'd been holding back at the police station. All the humiliation, all the terror, all the pain of the betrayal just poured out of me. When I finally calmed down, I told her everything, every single detail. The breakfast, the insistence, Derek's whisper at the hospital, his accusation in front of the police. Nicole listened to it all, her face shifting from concern to a quiet, contained fury. When I finished, she asked just one question. What are we going to do? And that's when the CEO in me woke up, the woman who runs a $22 million company. I looked at her and said, "We're not waiting for the police, Nicole. They already have their story. We're going hunting. We're going to find every rotten thing, every lie, every stolen dollar this man has hidden. I'm not just proving my innocence, I'm proving his guilt. And I'm going to destroy his life the same way he tried to destroy mine." My living room became our war room. Nicole brought her laptop, I got mine. The target was clear, Derek Hutchinson. We couldn't look for the poison ourselves. That was the police's job. But Derek was greedy. His whole plan was to get my money. And greed always, always leaves a trail. We started with the company's financial records. As president and CEO, I had access to everything. Derek, as VP of operations, also had significant access. But I was the owner. I had the master passwords to every server, every account. Nicole, who's a genius with numbers, started cross-referencing payment records from the last 2.5 years. We worked through the night, fueled by coffee and pure determination. Around 3 a.m, when my eyes were burning from staring at spreadsheets, Nicole stopped typing. The silence stretched out. Then she said quietly, "Diane, I found something." She turned her laptop toward me. On the screen was a line item that repeated every quarter. Payments to a consulting firm called Summit Business Advisors. I'd never heard of them. Nicole had already looked them up. No website, no business registration, nothing. It was a shell company. I asked her how much. Nicole swallowed hard before answering. Quarterly payments. They started small about 2 years ago. But the last one, from last month, was $52,000. My blood went cold. $52,000 to a company that didn't exist. Nicole kept clicking, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She looked up at me, and her eyes were filled with a terrible realization. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "Diane, he wasn't just cheating on you. He's been stealing from you for years. Stealing from you for years." Those words echoed in my living room like a death sentence. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by ice-cold adrenaline. Being cheated on is one thing. It hurts, it humiliates, it destroys trust. But being robbed by the man you brought into your home, into your business, into the legacy your late husband built, that's a whole different level of violation. This was war. And I was ready to fight. We spent the rest of the night and into the early morning buried in bank statements, invoices, payment records. It was like pulling a thread on a sweater. The more we pulled, the more everything unraveled. Nicole was methodical and relentless. She tracked every payment to Summit Business Advisors and uncovered 2 more shell companies: National Freight Consulting and Premier Supply Chain Group. Generic names, boring, designed to blend in with legitimate business expenses. They were all registered in Nevada, a state famous for making it easy to create front companies. Derek wasn't stupid. He knew how to hide money. But he didn't know I had Nicole. And Nicole doesn't give up. By dawn, with the Charlotte sun starting to paint the sky orange, we had the final number: $520,000. That's what he'd stolen from my company in less than 2.5 years. $520,000 that should have gone to employee bonuses, to equipment upgrades, to Maya's college fund. I felt physically sick. That was money we needed. Money Robert had worked himself to death to earn. And Derek had just funneled it out to finance his double life. As we followed the money trail, another pattern emerged. Nicole managed to access the records of the bank accounts receiving these payments. And from there, she found the expenses. One expense in particular jumped out at us. A monthly payment made religiously on the first of every month for exactly $4,600. It was going to a luxury property management company. A quick search showed us the address. A high-end apartment building in Myers Park, the fanciest neighborhood in Charlotte. I knew that building. It had a doorman, a fitness center, a rooftop terrace. A lifestyle that Vanessa Price, on an assistant salary, could never afford on her own. There was no doubt left. It was their love nest. Paid for with my money. With money stolen from the company my husband built. The audacity of it was staggering. Derek didn't just have a mistress. He set her up in luxury 10 minutes from our house and made me pay for it. Every discovery shattered the image I'd had of him into smaller and smaller pieces until there was nothing left but a greedy, soulless monster. But the discovery that really set me up for checkmate came from an unexpected place. While Nicole was digging through financials, I decided to look at the human side of Derek's betrayal. I started thinking about who he was before me. Friends, family, past relationships. And one name floated up from my memory. A name he'd mentioned maybe twice in our whole marriage, always with disdain, like she was an embarrassing chapter of his past. Angela Martinez, his college girlfriend. I remembered him saying once that she'd been too clingy and had gone into a boring career. I got on my laptop and started searching. Social media, public records, anything I could find. And there it was, her LinkedIn profile, Angela Martinez. And right under her name, her current position, lead pharmacist at a major drugstore chain right here in Charlotte. My heart started pounding. Pharmacist. The word flashed in my mind like a neon warning sign. The poison, the toxic substance the doctor mentioned. Vanessa's collapse. Derek wouldn't have the knowledge or access to get something like that on his own. But a pharmacist would. I showed Nicole. She stopped what she was doing and stared at the screen. Her jaw literally dropped open. She looked at me and said, "My God, Diane, this is it. This is the connection." But how could we prove it? It would be his word against hers. We needed something concrete, something undeniable. Nicole had that dangerous glint in her eyes that I'd come to love. She started digging deeper into the company's digital records. Emails, browser histories, call logs from Derek's work phone. And there it was. Buried among hundreds of calls to suppliers and clients and business contacts was one number that showed up repeatedly. Multiple calls over the past few weeks, short calls, 2 or 3 minutes each. Nicole ran the number through Google. The first result was the pharmacy where Angela Martinez worked as the lead pharmacist. It was all connected. Derek, Kevin, his brother, who we discovered owned the shell companies. And now, Angela. A conspiracy to rob me, to erase me, to take everything. I stood up and walked to the window. The city was waking up below. Normal people going to normal jobs, living normal lives. And here I was, in my expensive home, planning how to expose an attempted murder conspiracy orchestrated by my own husband. I looked at my reflection in the glass. The exhausted woman I'd been was gone. In her place was someone with fire burning in her eyes. They'd messed with the wrong person. They'd woken up something fierce. And I was going to hunt every single one of them down. Starting with Angela Martinez. Just knowing her name wasn't enough. I needed her to talk. I needed a confession, concrete proof that tied Derek directly to the poison. Going to Detective Harris with a theory about an ex-girlfriend wasn't going to get me anywhere. He'd already made it clear who he suspected. I had to play Derek's game, dirty and from the shadows. I called my lawyer, Richard, a ruthless man I'd known since Robert's days. I explained the situation, the connection to the pharmacist, the urgency. He understood immediately. Richard laid out the strategy. He told me we couldn't just accuse her directly or she'd shut down completely. We had to offer her a way out, a lifeline that looked better than going down with Derek's sinking ship. The plan was simple and brutal. Corner her, show her we knew everything, and make it clear that her only chance of avoiding a cell next to her ex-boyfriend was to cooperate. And I was going to be the one to do it. The next afternoon I dressed for battle. A sharp navy blue pantsuit, hair pulled back, minimal but precise makeup. I needed to look like the CEO in control, not the betrayed wife falling apart. I went to the pharmacy in the late afternoon when it would be quieter. Richard waited in his car a block away. I walked in and the door chime announced my arrival. The place was clean and organized, smelling of medicine and hand sanitizer. And there she was behind the counter in her white coat, Angela Martinez. She was petite, with sharp features and intelligent eyes that looked tired. When she saw me, she didn't recognize me at first. I walked slowly to the counter. She gave me a professional smile and asked how she could help. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I looked her right in the eye and said, "I'm here to talk to you about Derek Hutchinson." Her smile froze. The color drained from her face. She glanced around nervously and whispered that I must have her confused with someone else, that she didn't know anyone by that name. I leaned in close and lowered my voice so only she could hear. "I know about the phone calls, Angela. I know about the meetings, and I know what you gave him." Panic flooded her eyes. She started trembling, insisting she didn't know what I was talking about, that I needed to leave or she'd call security. I smiled then, a smile with no warmth in it whatsoever. "Go ahead, call security, call the police. They'd love to know that a licensed pharmacist has been supplying controlled substances to a man under investigation for attempted murder. Being an accomplice to something like this carries almost the same sentence as the person who did it. And federal prison isn't a pleasant place for women like us, Angela." Each word was a calculated strike. I watched the internal war on her face. Loyalty to a man who'd already thrown her under the bus versus the primal terror of losing everything, her career, her freedom, her entire life. She glanced toward the small office in the back and muttered, "Not here." We went into her cramped office that smelled like paper and disinfectant. As soon as the door closed, she fell apart. Tears started streaming down her face. The words came tumbling out. She told me Derek had reached out to her several months ago, rekindling an old friendship. That he'd played the victim, said he was trapped in an unhappy marriage, that I was cold and controlling, that he just needed a clean way out. He'd manipulated her, used their history, the affection she still had for him. He didn't ask for poison directly. He was smarter than that. He described my health problems, my ulcer, my stress-related heart issues, and asked for something that could cause cardiac arrest. Something that would look natural, wouldn't leave obvious traces in an autopsy. She confessed through her tears that she'd given him an extremely high dose of a certain heart medication, something that in excess would cause exactly the symptoms he described, and that as a side effect in a pregnant woman could and would cause exactly what happened to Vanessa. She cried that she didn't know about the affair, didn't know about the pregnancy, that Derek swore it was just to scare me into retiring early. Pathetic lies, but I let her talk. I needed her to empty the glass. When she finally stopped sobbing, I made my move. Angela, I don't want you in prison. You were manipulated and used, just like I was. But I need proof, undeniable proof that he planned this. She shook her head, saying she had nothing, that all their conversations were by phone or in person, no trail. But I pushed. Think. Anything. An email, a text, anything at all. She was silent for a long moment, mascara smeared down her face. Then her eyes widened. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small black flash drive. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He was paranoid, always has been. Afraid I'd record him to blackmail him later. So he recorded some of our conversations himself as insurance, as leverage against me if I ever decided to talk. She held out a trembling hand. I copied the files from his phone one day when he left it on my counter, for my own protection. The devil's voice is on here. I took that tiny flash drive from her hand and felt its weight. Not the physical weight of the small device, but the weight of truth, the weight of justice. I thanked Angela with a single nod and walked out. She'd played her part, driven by pure self-preservation. I got into Richard's car and handed him the flash drive without a word. He looked at it, then at me, and a rare smile of admiration crossed his face. Let's hear what the devil has to say. We didn't go to my house. Too many memories there. We went to Richard's office, an impersonal but secure space. Nicole was already waiting for us. The three of us sat around Richard's large conference table. He plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The silence in that room was so thick I could feel it pressing on my chest. He opened the folder. 5 audio files, all dated within the last few weeks. He clicked the first one. Derek's voice filled the room. The same voice that said good morning to me every day, that told me he loved me before bed, that whispered sweet things in my ear. But in this recording, it was different. Cold, metallic, completely devoid of warmth. It was him talking to Angela, starting with small talk, memories of college, charming her, setting the groundwork. My hands started to sweat. Then he started talking about me. He described how stressed I always was, how the company was killing me, how I was working myself into an early grave. He exaggerated every symptom, painted a picture of a fragile woman on the verge of collapse. He was building his narrative, creating the perfect excuse for a sudden death. Nicole reached over and squeezed my hand hard. Richard skipped ahead to the third file. The conversation was more direct. Angela's voice sounded hesitant, scared. She asked what exactly he wanted, and then Derek's voice, crystal clear and sharp as broken glass, said the words that burned into my soul. I need something strong, Angela, something that speeds up the heart, causes an arrhythmia. I want it to look like a sudden health crisis. Clean. The poor, overworked CEO who just couldn't handle the pressure anymore. He paused, and I stopped breathing. I need to avoid a messy divorce and keep the entire company. This woman is an obstacle in my path. An obstacle. That's what I'd become to him. After 2.5 years of marriage, of shared meals and shared beds, of trying to build a blended family with my daughter, I was an obstacle, a problem to be eliminated so he could take what Robert had built. Hot tears started streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness. Tears of pure rage. The last audio file was the most damning. It was recent, just days before our anniversary. Derek's voice was impatient, demanding. Do you have it ready yet? The anniversary is coming up. It's perfect timing. A special breakfast, a romantic gesture. Nobody will suspect a thing. Angela tried to argue about the dosage, the risks involved, and he cut her off cold. "Just do it, Angela. Consider it a very big favor. One I'll never forget." It was the voice of a predator cornering prey, not asking, commanding, and she, weak and deluded, had obeyed. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Richard closed the laptop. "We have him," he said, his voice calm but final. "This is more than enough. Conspiracy to commit murder. It's over for Derek Hutchinson." Relief washed over me so powerfully my legs felt weak. It was done. The truth was there, recorded, undeniable. We made our plan. Richard would take the recordings to Detective Harris first thing in the morning, along with all the financial records Nicole had compiled. We'd expose everything at once: the theft, the affair, the attempted murder. I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time since I saw Vanessa convulsing on that floor, I felt like I could actually breathe. I was leaving Richard's office when my phone rang. The screen showed my company's main reception number. Strange, at this hour. I answered. Carol, our receptionist, sounded shaken. She said there was a woman in the lobby making a scene, demanding to see Mr. Hutchinson immediately. She said she was Vanessa's mother, Ruby Price, from South Carolina. My blood went cold. What was she doing here? I told Carol not to let anyone leave and that I was on my way. The storm wasn't over yet. I drove back to my office like my life depended on it. The image of Vanessa's mother confronting the man who destroyed her daughter gave me a new urgency. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Vanessa, about the baby she'd lost, about this woman who'd driven hours looking for answers. When I arrived, the lobby of Porter Distribution Systems looked like a theater stage, and at the center stood Ruby Price. She was a black woman in her mid-50s, short and solid, with eyes that held the weight of unbearable grief. She wore a simple church dress and clutched a worn handbag. Derek stood in front of her, trying to use his charm to calm the situation and failing miserably. A few employees watched from a safe distance. I told security to hang back and let this play out. I wanted Derek to face this. When Ruby saw me, she stopped yelling for a moment. Her eyes looked me up and down. There was pain there, but also unbreakable dignity. She didn't know the full truth yet. To her, I was still the jealous wife under investigation. But her grief was bigger than suspicion. She turned back to Derek, and her voice, raw from crying and rage, echoed across the marble lobby. "You promised my baby girl everything. Promised you'd leave your wife. Promised you'd take care of her and the baby. My grandbaby. You killed my grandbaby." Derek tried to calm her down, speaking softly, suggesting they talk privately. But Ruby didn't want privacy. She wanted the world to hear. "Talk privately? My daughter is lying in a hospital bed, unable to have children ever again. The doctors said the damage was permanent, and you want to talk privately?" Derek's composure was cracking. He looked around at the staring employees, at me standing by the door watching everything. He was losing control. The smooth operator was being revealed as a cornered rat. Then he made the worst possible mistake. He pulled out his wallet, opened it, and took out a thick stack of $100 bills. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He held the money out to her, offering it for medical expenses. The silence that followed was electric. Ruby Price looked at that money. Then she looked at his face, and she laughed. A short, bitter, joyless laugh. Then with a swift motion, she slapped his hand, sending the bills flying through the air like dirty confetti. Money scattered across my lobby floor. Her voice, when it came back, was like thunder. $10,000? That's what my grandbaby's life is worth? That's the price of my daughter's future? She stepped forward, her finger jabbing at his chest. "I may be poor, Mr. Hutchinson. I may come from a small town you've never heard of. But I do not sell my daughter's blood. You keep your dirty money for your lawyers. You're going to need them." That scene broke me and rebuilt me all at once. The dignity of that woman, her righteous fury, the contempt she had for his blood money. My own pain seemed small compared to that force of nature. In that moment, everything crystallized. This wasn't about proving my innocence anymore. It was about getting justice for Ruby, for Vanessa, for the baby who never got to be born. Derek, completely humiliated, had security escort Ruby out. He came toward me, his face a mask of controlled rage, muttering about how that woman was crazy and he'd sue her for harassment. I just stared at him. For the first time, I didn't look away. There was no fear left, only contempt. I told him quietly, "You do what you have to do, Derek." Then I turned and walked to the elevator, leaving him standing there among the scattered bills on the floor. Inside the elevator, adrenaline coursed through my veins. Waiting until morning to go to the police felt too slow, too passive. Ruby Price had shown me that justice sometimes needs a stage, and I had the perfect stage, the one place where Derek felt most powerful, where he thought he'd conquered his kingdom, the boardroom. I called Nicole. My voice came out cold as steel. "Call an emergency board meeting. 1 hour from now, everyone, no exceptions. Tell them it's about a catastrophic security breach and set up the projector. We're giving a presentation." The next hour was a blur. Nicole was a hurricane of efficiency, summoning every board member. There were 6 of them, besides me and Derek. Business leaders who'd known Robert, who'd watched me take over and grow the company. People whose trust Derek had worked hard to win. While Nicole organized, I locked myself in my office with Richard, preparing the presentation. It wasn't an accusation, it was an execution. When the time came, I walked into that boardroom. Derek was already there in his usual seat. He shot me a furious look, still angry about the lobby scene. He probably thought this was about some operational issue he could easily handle. His arrogance was palpable. He felt safe in that room. He had no idea he was sitting in his own courtroom. I sat at the head of the table. Robert's seat, my seat. I waited for everyone to settle. Silence fell. All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. I've called this meeting because I've uncovered serious breaches that compromise the financial integrity and security of Porter distribution systems. And the person responsible is in this room." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Curiosity turned to tension. I saw Derek shift in his seat, a slight frown appearing. "First, the theft," I said. Nicole, from her position by the wall, pressed a button. The projector screen lit up behind me. The first image showed the logo for Summit Business Advisors. Below it, a detailed spreadsheet of every transfer, every date, every dollar. Over the past 2 years, $520,000 have been funneled from this company into 3 shell corporations. I clicked to the next slide, showing registration documents. These companies are all registered to one person, Kevin Hutchinson, brother of our Vice President of Operations, Derek Hutchinson. The shock in the room was audible. People turned to stare at Derek. His face went rigid. He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. "Please hold your questions, Derek. I'm not finished." Second, the betrayal. The next slide appeared. A photo of the luxury apartment building in Myers Park. A significant portion of this stolen money financed a lifestyle inconsistent with employee salaries. For example, this apartment with monthly rent of $4,600. The next slide showed the lease agreement. An apartment rented by Derek for the exclusive use of his executive assistant, Vanessa Price. A murmur rippled through the room. Exposing financial theft was one thing. Exposing a sordid affair was another. Derek was on his feet, yelling that this was outrageous, an invasion of privacy, that I was using personal issues to attack him professionally. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "Sit down, Derek, I'm not finished." He hesitated, but the glares from the other board members forced him back into his seat. "Which brings us to the final matter," I continued, my voice low and dangerous. "The attempted murder." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I looked Derek directly in the eye. "As you know, Vanessa Price collapsed in our office 2 days ago. The police initially theorized that I, driven by jealousy, had poisoned her." I paused, letting that hang in the air. But the truth is far more sinister. I nodded to Nicole. And then the sound. Derek's voice, his recorded voice, filled the silent boardroom. I need something strong, Angela. Something that speeds up the heart. I want it to look like a sudden health crisis. Clean. I need to avoid a messy divorce and keep the entire company. This woman is an obstacle. No one breathed. The recording continued, with him planning to use our anniversary as the perfect opportunity. When his voice finally stopped, the silence that followed was the heaviest thing I've ever felt. Every eye in that room was fixed on Derek. His face had gone ashen. He was trembling, eyes wide with terror and disbelief. He'd been utterly exposed. The king was naked. He opened and closed his mouth, but no sound came out. He was finished. And at that exact moment, the boardroom doors swung open. Detective Harris walked in, followed by 2 uniformed officers. He looked straight at Derek and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Derek Hutchinson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." The officers moved swiftly. One went for Kevin, Derek's brother, who was cowering in the corner. The other walked to Derek, pulled out handcuffs, and with a metallic click that sounded like justice itself, cuffed his hands behind his back. Derek didn't resist. He was in complete shock. As they led him out past his colleagues and business partners, he turned his head and looked at me. In that look, I didn't see hatred or anger. I saw surprise. The surprise of a predator who'd been hunted by his prey for the first time in his life. He'd underestimated me until the very end. And that was his fatal mistake. I sat there at the head of the table, watching him be led away in handcuffs, feeling months of pain and fear and betrayal finally start to lift from my shoulders. Justice hadn't been quiet. It had been a spectacle, and he'd been the star. After they took him away, the boardroom fell into stunned silence. The board members looked at me with a mixture of shock, pity, and newfound respect. No one knew what to say. I stood up, my voice firm despite my shaking legs. "The company is secure. The threat has been contained. Nicole will forward all documentation to you. We'll meet again in 48 hours to discuss restructuring." I didn't wait for responses. I just walked out, leaving the chaos I'd orchestrated behind me. The next few months were a whirlwind. The trial was swift. With the audio recordings, financial records, and Angela Martinez's testimony, she took a plea deal to avoid prison. Derek had nowhere to run. He tried to blame Angela, Kevin, even me. But the jury didn't buy it. The sentence came down on a cold December afternoon. Derek Hutchinson was found guilty and sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. 18 years. He walked into that courtroom at 47. He'd walk out a senior citizen. Kevin, his cowardly brother, got 7 years. He cooperated fully, giving up every detail of the money laundering scheme for a reduced sentence. Angela, the deluded pharmacist, got 3 years probation but lost her license forever. The career she'd spent years building, destroyed by a man who wouldn't have thought twice about sacrificing her. And Vanessa, she never fully recovered. Her body healed, but her ability to have children was gone forever. She refused to testify. As soon as she was discharged, her mother Ruby took her back to South Carolina, away from the scandal, away from the city that had nearly killed her. The divorce was the final piece. Richard took the papers to Derek in prison. There was no negotiation. He was entitled to nothing. He signed away all claims to my assets, my company, my life. I received the signed documents by courier. I looked at his signature, the name of the man I'd once loved, now just ink on paper setting me free. I didn't feel joy or relief, just emptiness, the end of a terrible chapter. I walked to my fireplace, lit a fire, and tossed those papers into the flames. Watched his name turn to ash. I thought that was the end. I thought with him in prison and the divorce final, I could start picking up the pieces. I was wrong. The final blow came 3 days after his arrest. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. The voice on the other end was weak and raspy, but unmistakable. Vanessa, calling from the hospital. She asked if this was Mrs. Porter. I said yes and asked how she was feeling. Long silence. Then her voice changed, turning sharp with bitterness. She said, "I know what you did." I was confused. I asked what she meant. "The food," she hissed, "that container. I know you gave it to me on purpose. A woman like you always knows. You felt something was wrong, but you didn't care." I tried to interrupt, to explain, but she wouldn't let me speak. Her voice gained strength, fueled by pain. "You knew I was pregnant. You knew Derek loved me, was going to leave you for me. You could have warned me. You could have thrown that food away. But you wanted me to suffer. You wanted both of us to lose everything. You sat there and watched me eat poison meant for you. You're just as guilty as he is." Her words hit me like physical blows. I was standing in my kitchen when Maya, my daughter, who was 13 then, walked in from school. She saw the shock on my face and stopped. I couldn't answer Vanessa. What could I say? That my instincts had screamed danger, but I'd ignored them? That I'd felt relief getting rid of that food? That some dark part of me had maybe even enjoyed watching Derek's young mistress take something I didn't want? Vanessa hung up, leaving me with silence and her accusations burning in my ears. I lowered the phone slowly, hands shaking. I looked at Maya standing in the doorway. Her eyes, so much like Robert's, were filled with questions and doubt I never wanted her to have about me. She'd seen my anguish, heard the tail end of Vanessa's rage. And then, with the terrified voice of a child watching her world crumble, Maya whispered, "Mom, did you know the food was poisoned?" My daughter's question hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. "Mom, did you know? The world could call me victim, hero, survivor." But Maya's look was the only judgment that mattered. In that moment, I saw doubt in her eyes, a seed of distrust that Vanessa's call had planted. My heart broke in a new and even more painful way. It's one thing to be betrayed by a man you chose, another to risk losing your child's trust. I knelt right there on the kitchen floor and took her hands in mine. "Maya, look at me." I waited until her eyes met mine. "No," I said, voice choked but firm. "I swear on your father's memory, I did not know that food was poisoned. I had no idea Derek was capable of something so evil." I saw a flicker of relief, but the shadow of doubt remained. And I decided she deserved more than a simple answer. She deserved the ugly, complicated truth. "But," I continued, and my voice broke, "I felt it, baby. I felt something was wrong. You know that feeling you get? That chill that tells you not to do something? I felt that. His insistence, the look in his eyes. It wasn't right, and I gave the container to Vanessa anyway." The tears I'd been holding back started to fall. I don't know why, Maya. I don't know if it was because I was scared to confront him, or because I just wanted the problem to disappear, or if some ugly part of me was satisfied to see his mistress take what I didn't want. I don't know. And that doubt, I think I'll have to live with it forever. That conversation was the hardest of my life, but also the most important. It was the beginning of healing for both of us. In the months that followed, life without Derek was strange and quiet. The house felt too big. But little by little, we filled the emptiness, not with a new man, but with each other. Movie nights, cooking classes together. We talked about everything, her dad, the future, the pain, and my guilt. I started therapy, something I, the strong, unshakable CEO, never thought I'd need. I learned to forgive myself. Not completely, maybe never completely. But I learned to understand that in survival situations, instincts act in ways logic can't explain. I was a cornered animal. My first reaction was to deflect the threat. Was it noble? No. Was it human? Terribly so. That's the question Vanessa threw at me. The question maybe you're asking yourself. Am I a victim who acted on instinct? Or a woman who consciously let another person suffer to save herself? The truth lives somewhere in that uncomfortable gray area. Rebuilding trust with Maya was slow. She watched me, tested me. She needed to be sure her mom was still the same person. And slowly, she saw. She saw my sleepless nights, my therapy sessions, my tears. She understood I was a victim too, carrying my own scars and guilt. The day she came home from school, hugged me out of nowhere and said, "I love you, Mom. I believe you." On that day, I felt the sun starting to shine again. While my personal life rebuilt, my professional life exploded. With Derek and Kevin gone, I cleaned house. I promoted Nicole to Vice President of Operations, a position she'd deserved for years. We hired new auditors, implemented security controls that made schemes like Derek's impossible. And the company, free from the parasite that had been bleeding it dry, flourished. Our profits soared, our reputation strengthened. Porter Distribution Systems became a reflection of my own resilience. One night, almost a year later, I was in my office late reviewing quarterly reports. I looked at the empty chair where Derek used to sit. I didn't feel anger anymore, or pain. I felt pity. Pity for the wasted life, for the greed that consumed him, for the decent man he might have been before he lost his way. I picked up the old photo of Robert I keep on my desk. His eyes in that picture seemed to smile at me. I wondered what he'd say about all this. I think he'd say I protected his legacy, protected our daughter, and that in the end, that's what matters. In that moment, looking at the picture of the man who gave me everything, I finally felt at peace with the woman I'd become. Today, a little over a year after that day turned my world upside down, I can say I'm okay. More than okay. I feel more myself than ever before. Porter Distribution Systems is stronger than ever. We've grown 38% this year. With Nicole running operations, the company runs like clockwork. We've brought in new people we can trust. The poison was removed and the body healed. My relationship with Maya, who's 14 now, is the most precious thing in my life. That dark period brought us together in ways I never imagined. There are no more secrets, no more doubts, just mutual understanding and deep respect. She's grown into a strong and insightful young woman. And I've learned that being strong doesn't mean having no scars. It means knowing how to live with them. As for Derek, he's exactly where he belongs, serving his 18-year sentence in federal prison. The news I get is sparse, through lawyers. He lost everything. The stolen money was recovered. The reputation, the power, the charm, all dissolved under fluorescent prison lights. He tried to steal an empire. In the end, the only thing he owns is an orange jumpsuit and an ID number. And Vanessa, for a long time, I wondered about her. Her accusation, as painful as it was, came from unimaginable grief. A few months ago, I was in Columbia, South Carolina for a conference. During a break, I stopped at a small coffee shop, and there she was behind the counter. Our eyes met. The world stopped again. She was thinner. The light dimmed in her eyes. But there was strength there that hadn't existed before. I didn't know what to do. Leave? Pretend I hadn't seen her? But I was tired of running. I walked to the counter. We didn't say much. I ordered coffee. She made it in silence. When she handed it to me, our hands brushed. "I'm so sorry, Vanessa," I said, the words coming from my soul. "For everything." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. There was no dramatic moment of forgiveness, no hug. But in that nod, I felt understanding. A quiet acceptance that we were both survivors of the same catastrophe, each carrying our own wreckage. She's rebuilding far from everything that hurt her, and I pray she finds peace. I thought romantic love was over for me, that Derek's betrayal had poisoned that part of my soul forever. But life has a funny way of surprising you. 6 months ago, at a conference, I met someone. His name is Daniel. He's 49, owns a tech company in Boston, and he's a widower too. His wife passed from cancer a few years back. We started talking about work, about logistics and technology. But soon we shifted to loss, grief, what it's like raising kids alone. He was kind, with a gentle smile and eyes that really listened. For the first time in ages, I felt light. One night over dinner, I decided to tell him everything. The whole story. Derek, the poison, the prison, my guilt. I needed him to know who I was, the baggage I carried. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, I expected shock, maybe disgust. But no. He just reached across the table and covered my hand with his. And he said something I'll never forget. Diane, you're not defined by the worst day of your life. You're defined by how you stood back up after it. We're taking it slow. Dinners, phone calls, weekend visits when schedules align. It's a grown-up relationship built on honesty and respect, not on filling voids. And most important, Maya approves. After he left from meeting her, she came to me and said, "Mom, he looks at you the same way Dad used to." Coming from her, that was the greatest blessing I could receive. Today, looking back, I see the woman I was. Confident, yes, but maybe a little naive, a little blind to the darkness hiding behind a charming smile. The pain broke me, but rebuilt me stronger. I've learned true strength isn't about never falling. It's about how many times you get back up. I protected my legacy, protected my daughter, found a new beginning where I thought there'd only be an end. The moral question about that day, about that container of food, it's still there, a small scar on my soul. But I know now it doesn't define me. It's just a reminder of the price of survival. And you, what would you have done in my place? Do you think I did the right thing? Let me know in the comments what city you're listening from. And if you enjoyed my story, please leave a like so the channel can keep bringing you more stories like this. Thank you for your kindness. On the screen, you'll see another story I'm sure you'll love. Go ahead and click to watch. Oh, and if you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to subscribe, okay? Until the next story.